So, hi everyone, Harsha here, and I'm the president of the ASELxPenn Club that's been putting together today's conference. And today we have a really special, or this session is particularly special because we're actually talking to David Horowitz from Touchdown Ventures on how you guys can take that first step into venture capital. So, today we'll be talking about an introduction to venture capital and what's the best way to learn about it, what's the best way to get engaged, and what's the best way to get started. So, David, thank you so much for joining us for this 48-hour conference. We're so excited to have you as part of the event. Hopefully, you're having a good day so far.
It's a great conference. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, really, really appreciate it. And I think a lot of our students by now are thinking, you know what, how do I get into VC? Where do I start? And it can seem very daunting and huge, especially for people who are not used to the technical terms, who are not used to this whole world. So I thought we'll start off a little easy and ask you, how did you get started into venture? Was this something like part of your grand plan, or was this something you stumbled upon it as a student yourself?
So when I was a student back in the late 1990s, venture capital wasn't as popular as it was today. There were no venture capital firms hiring students, so we all had to go find other jobs. So at that point in time, it's still popular. You know, a lot of people investment banking is a really good career path out of undergrad. So that's what I did. So I started investment banking, ended up really built, and I think we'll talk a little bit, I'm sure, in this discussion about industry and domain experience, which I'm a real big fan of. So I built a lot of industry and domain experience in the media industry, in the cable industry. And the reason I got into venture capital is as I was looking for personal reasons, actually to relocate to Philadelphia, ended up actually finding an opportunity at Comcast, the big cable media company here, was looking to build out its venture capital group. And I had this one desire to get into venture capital, have this experience. So I think and also wanted to be in Philadelphia. So I checked a lot of the boxes that they were looking for. And so kind of a little bit of the right place and right time. But I think a little bit of the moral of the story is obviously having an interest in it, but having a background and domain experience can be really helpful in terms of being able to, in a very competitive job search, you can differentiate yourself, which is what I was able to do.
Amazing. And you mentioned you were investment banking before this. I'm very curious, how did you know going into that was something that suited your skill set? Was it something that you were just interested in and willing to learn? Or were you like, okay, this is the best career for me because of XYZ?
Well, I was an accounting and finance major, and I decided I didn't want to go into accounting, that I felt like I um, was more interested in the finance side than I kind of had the dual major. And at that point in time, still obviously popular, investment banking was really one of the more popular career paths for an undergrad. You could say I went to Michigan, so out of the Michigan undergrad business program that I graduated from, and just got a lot of advice. I think investment banking is a good area where there's so many roads it could lead to, because you're really learning a lot about finance, corporate finance, investments, acquisitions. And so it creates a really good learning and training ground where you could say, okay, I want to go into M&A, or I want to go into private equity, or I want to go into venture capital. And so at that point, I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. And then I developed an interest in of the different areas, venture capital, and as I mentioned, was interested in leveraging the particular industry experience that I had in the media and the cable industry. It's kind of how I got into it.
No, very, very cool. And I think that shows like a really clear path and a really cool story of how you got
Thanks.
into it. But we know, yeah, but we know today that VCs do hire like undergrads, like at least now, right off the get go. What do you think VCs look for in students, in a sense, whether it's an MBA student, whether it's an undergrad student? What put us in the mind of a VC? What do you want to see in us?
I think experience really matters. So some experience, and that makes that person qualified for the role. And the good thing is, I think, again, there are a lot of different experiences. I would argue working in a startup is really good background for a venture capital firm, because you're learning about the ins and outs. You can start building empathy with entrepreneurs, which I think is really important. I would argue investment banking is good if you can understand how to analyze financial statements. I think there's some elements of consulting that make it good. So I think it's a little bit of the right experience, I'm sure there are areas, that are probably less good. I won't name them. But I think you understand the point. And it's kind of like, what did you do there? And how can you connect what you did? So when I was in investment banking, for example, I worked on a lot of startup companies that were either doing some fundraising or looking to go public. And I could demonstrate some transaction experience, and I could demonstrate. So I think it's really all about getting some experience, getting some transactions. What they may not be venture capital transaction, but something that can tie into ultimately what venture capital is investing in startup companies. And so you need to be able to tie in to, demonstrate that ability.
No, I think that's a very good answer. And I'm curious in a sense to just build on this question a little bit. Well, like personally as an entrepreneur, I've been an entrepreneur for the last 7 years, but only recently have I really started learning about venture capital and VC. At times, it feels like there are so many people ahead of me in at least the theory side of things and in trying to understand that aspect of it. And I know both, of course, the theory and some experience in like interning in VCs and running startups is important as well. But what's the balance between that? What is the ideal like balance between the theory and the information and kind of the aspects of it that can be learned from books and reading and classes versus the experiential aspect? Is there a ratio? Or I know that's a very financial way of looking at it, but what's kind of the mix that you're looking for between the two?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a magical ratio of one or the other. I think
1 year versus 2 years.
yeah,
No.
the ideal candidate would have both. And probably at some point I should talk a little bit about some of the internship programs that we're running, because actually we just started an undergraduate interpreter program. What we're offering is both. We're saying if you join, our what we call Touchdown Ventures College internship program, which we just announced, back in October. Basically, it's a 3-month program, and every week we're going to teach you some of the theory on venture capital, and then every week you're going to have the ability to get some experience. So we think both. I mean, if anything, we think both matter because our internship program includes both. I think, I think you can teach a lot of the theory. I think the experience is where you can really differentiate yourself. And I think it's as I said before, it's not just experience in doing venture capital, it's industry experience, it's startup experience. There's some very tangible things that I think make somebody, the further away you are to working with startups, the harder it is going to be for you to become a VC, because it's almost like speaking a foreign language to some extent. You have to train yourself on, how to talk to startups, how to work with startups. Most of the, kind of positions for, I would say, more undergrads, but even for some grad students, is very much around things like sourcing investments, research of investments, analyzing investments. All those skills around understanding startups. And so that's where I think that experiential is really important.
Very cool. And for those looking at getting into VC right now, what would maybe be the first few steps or the first contact point that they can go into to start getting that relevant experience?
Well, I think that, certainly at their institution, if there are venture capital classes, I don't think that's going to hurt. There may be online classes through a Coursera or something else. And that'll also demonstrate that there's an interest level, which I think is important. I think ultimately there's two things. I think one, just through someone's own time and research, they could start putting together, lists of startups, almost like how people build mock stock portfolios. You could do the same thing in venture capital. You can build a thesis around an area and say, here are companies that I've done research on that I think are really interesting. That starts to demonstrate whether you could do the work or not. Just like if you were getting evaluated for a hedge fund, it's kind of like, show me some evidence that you can, work. Is kind of the same thing in venture capital. And, as we talked about, there are a lot of, groups that are trying to offer more and more internships, more opportunities for both undergraduate and graduate students. I mentioned the program that we're doing. It's relatively new, but there are a lot of others. And I think, hopefully there'll be more and more, more and more of those opportunities. And they're probably, I know our program is going to be competitive. I know other programs are competitive, but it's kind of, again, the best way of, getting in is just getting that experience.
Very cool. So winding down in a sense, how do we as students know that this is the right thing for us? Like you mentioned a little bit about why you were interested in the beginning. How do we know if we'd be able to cope if this is something that we should be thinking about pursuing in the first place?
Yeah, one other comment I just want to make before I get to that, but I will answer that question is, people shouldn't feel discouraged that they couldn't get a job in VC today. Like, there's not that many of them, especially for undergrads. A lot of VC firms want people with more experience, so they don't necessarily want to hire someone entry level. And so it's okay. Like, look at my background. I started investment banking, and I was able to work my way into venture capital. And there's other people that started startups, and so build that path for yourself. Don't be discouraged. I think it's more often than not. And I think this is just great career advice, just from somebody who's been in the industry for a while. Try different things when you're that's the great thing about an internship. Try a startup internship. Try a VC internship. I think to answer your question, you said, how do students know if a career in VC is right for them? They got to try it. They got to try. They got to try. They may do 3 internships. One in investment banking, one in startup, and one in VC. And they might like the startup one. Like, that might be the level of energy and the enthusiasm, or it might be the investment banking of the challenge of and the thrill of doing a large, merger deal with, a Fortune, 100 company or whatever, or maybe. And so I think nobody should say, like, no, you should always make decisions based on data, and data is in this case is actually doing these jobs. So I will say there are a couple of good organizations that's all. There are groups like ourselves that offer what I would call more formal internship programs, but there are a couple of groups that offer more paid kind of training on VC. There's a group that I've kind of helped advise over the years called Venture University that does this. There's another group called Going VC that does this. And these are good programs. They're very well organized. They're very well structured. They in a lot of ways, you get kind of coming out of it, a real almost certificate or training around VC. So those are also, and there's a few other ones, but those are the 2 I'm the most familiar with, where, if somebody said, I must, get into VC, in a lot of ways, it's a, kind of more of a paid apprenticeship, pay meaning you pay them actually, as opposed to them paying you. So it's a little bit of a different model.
No, definitely. Very cool. So as we wind down, last question before we end our very, very, I would say, informative and very cool 15 minutes with you is, tell us a little bit about how you felt early into your career in VC. Was this something that came natural to you, or were you like the rest of us who often need an adjustment period into things that are new and exciting? And how do you rise to the top and be the person you are today in the whole industry?
Yeah, I mean, I would say once I started in VC, I just really enjoyed the variety of different companies, the analysis of those companies, but just the challenge of it. I would say there's 2 challenges. One, there's the challenge of of all these opportunities you look at, which ones do you think are the ones that are going to be good investments? That's a big challenge. It's hard. There's a lot of imperfect information that you have access to. And then the other challenge is, what can you do? What ideas can you bring to the table? What connections can you bring to the table to help that entrepreneur be successful? Because ultimately, that's what this is all about. This is about making an investment in a startup, but doing adding the value so that the startup can be the leader in its industry and make you a great return on your investment.
No, very, very cool. So, parting words, final words of wisdom for our audience before we jump to the next thing for today.
Yeah, I think I think I'll summarize it of, find opportunities to get the experience. Don't be discouraged if those opportunities are hard to find. Come up with the right career path, whether that's going through the startup, going and working, at a professional services, investment banking firm, consulting firm. Every one of those paths could lead to venture capital, or you might decide that those are the best paths. So again, like be thoughtful about, a path that you can rate. And I think the last thing that I try to emphasize a few times is just how important domain experience is. And so I think that the more experience you have in industry or evaluating a particular type of company, or a background in evaluating technology, which tends to be a big part of venture capital, just think the more qualified you are to be a good investor.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I had so much fun talking to you, David. And I think our audience did as well. So really, really appreciate you taking the time out and sharing this with us. And with that, I think our session has come to an end, passing it back over to our MCs. And once again, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks again for having me. Nice to meet everybody here today too.
Likewise. Bye.
Bye.